All right, so we're going to be looking at a few lenses here that I like to use with the Fuji XH-1. Probably my favorite lens is this 10 to 24 millimeter. This is about an 18 to 42 millimeter full frame equivalent when you take the 1.17 crop on top of the APS-C type sensor. And here we can see the autofocus capabilities of this lens. This is face detection autofocus on. And I'm just having my son Zach, who's a bit of a character, walking back and forth here. Now this is another of their zoom lenses, the 16 to 55. I'm stopping all of these down, so this is at f2.8. I'm shooting in 24p and a shutter speed of 1/48 of a second. Here we are zoomed all the way in to 55 millimeters, and I'm looking here to see how well it focuses on his face, how well it tracks him, how much pulsing we get. And not bad. These lenses do great. This lens is fantastic with the image stabilization of the XH-1. So now we're moving on to the 50 to 140 f2.8. I've moved my tripod back a bit more here so I'm not too zoomed in. I'm at the 50 millimeter point, and Zach's once again walking back and forth. One of the things that's really great in this situation is the fact that even though he's backlit and there's some backlighting there, with the face tracking, this XH-1 really tracks or really exposes based on the face. And so that allows you to have really nice facial exposure so that you don't have too many shadows on the face. This is something I didn't quite think about when I was planning on doing this lens test, but it really worked out nicely with this camera, and it's very difficult to try and get this kind of quality out of the Sony a7 III with a standard lens. So now we're moving on to the prime lenses. The Fujis have great prime lenses. This is the 14 millimeter lens, a shot at f2.8. He's a little bit on the close side there, but it is a very nice close focusing lens. Really nice wide angle lens. It's really compact. There is a little bit of focus motor noise with this lens, so you actually will hear this lens from time to time as it kind of ratchets in and out. Now this is the 16 millimeter f1.4. If I had one lens that was my absolute favorite as far as focal length and bokeh, it is this lens. You can see a little slow to refocus there, but picks up his face very nicely. A nice shallow depth of field at f1.4. It will track him facially at this focal length about to the closet door that you see on your right. Now this is the 18 millimeter f2.0. This is one of the first lenses that they released in their triad of lenses. You can see not quite as smooth on racking focus here. It's a little bit quick, but it does pick him up pretty nicely as far as face detection is concerned. A little bit of pulsing there in and out. Overall, I found the first generation of Fuji lenses to be fairly noisy and not as reliable focusing wise. This is a 35 millimeter equivalent. It's the 23 millimeter f1.4, and I'm shooting this at f1.4. And you can see that there's really nice shallow depth of field. When he gets up close and it locks on his face, there's not a lot of pulsing in the background. Not quite as smooth as what we see from some of the f2.0 offerings, but not terrible. And we can see it tracks him back once again about to the doorway on the right there. Here we are now with the 23 millimeter f2.0. This is one of the newer lenses. This is a weather resistant lens. I love these lenses. These are very small lenses. They really have smooth focusing. They are completely quiet. Unlike the first generation lenses where you can hear the focus racking, you actually have no noise out of this. Now, we're going to move on here, and this is going to be the 35 millimeter f1.4, and this is a noisy lens. You can actually hear this lens when it's racking focus in a quiet environment. I didn't put a neutral density filter in, and hence the background's quite a bit more blown out because it's a little later in the day and we're shooting at f1.4, but does a really nice job of autofocusing on his face as he moves in and out. Even though this is a first generation lens and probably one of the slower focusing lenses, it still does a nice job. Now we can see we're using the 35mm f2.0. This, along with the 23mm, make a really great pair for travel. We can see smooth focusing, really nice out of focus elements, a little more of a buttery smooth racking of focus. It does hunt just a second there, not quite Canon quality, but does a really good job. And here we can see this is going to be the 56mm f1.2, and this is at f1.2, hence the background's a little bit more blown out, but we can see the exposure is kept up for his face there. It does not focus on the background. I don't know if that's because it's too blown out to ascertain some of the details, but it does capture his face fairly nicely when he comes back into focus. So once again, doing a really nice job. This also is a loud lens. You will hear this lens racking focus in a quiet environment. Now this is the macro lens. This is the 60mm f2.4 macro lens at f2.4. Once again, this one does a pretty decent job. It does struggle a bit there with figuring out the exposure once he moves out of the way, but once again you can see that effect of that exposure compensation adjusting for his face, which is a brilliant aspect of the Fuji lens system. Absolutely fantastic. This next lens is one of my favorites. I moved this camera back now. This is the 90mm f2.0 at f2.0. This is just a fantastic lens. You can see a little bit of difficulty figuring out where his face is with him kind of maneuvering out of the way there, but really great rendering, fast to focus. Just a beautiful lens as far as the way that it shows details and whatnot. Now, as I was doing these tests, I discovered that one of the unique things as compared to other cameras is the metering of this system is tied to that facial autofocus area. And so it does a really great job of adjusting your metering to keep that face properly metered. And this is actually with the multi-aspect metering. Now here we can see this is the Sony a7 III with the Sony Zeiss 55 1.8. Can see the autofocus maybe a little slower but a little more natural pull, but once again his face is darker. It has just a little bit of an issue with exposure and making that exposure proper for his face. Now it does retain some of the background highlights and keeps them from being as blown out as what you get with the Fuji, but that may not be something that you want. Here we can see the Sony a7 III at 24mm. This is at f4.0. And nice, really smooth focus racking here. It tracks him nicely. It will track him all the way back to the door, even at 24mm. So this is the Sony at 105mm. And the real struggle that I see with this camera is the fact that the exposure continues to adjust. Now, well, obviously, if you're kind of on a more auto mode, it's not a big deal. It's a bigger deal than if you adjust your parameters independently before you shoot, but that can be an issue for some people. Thanks for watching.